So we'll get started. So the host of today's session is Joss Colchester, who's also here. That's Joss, and he started the SI Network 3 years ago, and he's focusing on ecosystems building and building the capacity of our network and platform, making most of the content as well. And I'm a community developer on this SI Network platform, and I'm going to be responsible for any members' journeys. So you can also ask me any questions in a direct message after this session. So yeah, we won't take too much time with this. I'll just quickly um, just position ourselves. Where are we doing this for? We have different kinds of event series. This is part of the Explore series. So for anyone who's starting to join these sessions and who's just joined the SI Network platform, this is exactly for you. It's an introduction to how we work and how you can get involved, and there are going to be multiple events following this one as a series. But we also have different series. So we also have a learner series where you can actually learn more about the content, and one of our colleagues is responsible for that. And we also have the Connect series where you are going to be focusing on connecting with others in this space on certain topics. And we also have, or we're going to create creator series, and this is where you can actually as a practitioner get involved with tools around a certain challenge, or you can also be a challenge holder. So there are different levels on the SI network, and we will explain a little bit more about this later on. But just to get us warmed up, we would really love to hear from you. How familiar are you with systems innovation approaches from the scale from 0 to 10? And we would just love to see who's in the room. So you can write a number in the chat. Perfect. Okay, great. We do have quite a bit of diversity here. So we still hope that even if you are very, very experienced as well, that this session will be very useful to you. And yes, we'll dive right into it because we don't have that time. Um, and as I mentioned before, we'll answer all of your questions towards the end, so do write them in the chat. And I'll pass it over to Joss, who will give you a high-level overview first.
Yeah, great to be here. Thanks very much, Anya. It's good to see everyone and have you joining. As mentioned, purpose of today is to try and get you started, try and orientate you with this big area, these big ideas and methods in systems innovation. And we created a guide, kind of a quick start guide, which we're going to be covering today, but it's just to say all the content you see today, you'll actually find at the top of this board on the left-hand side where we started. You'll see a link there that links you to the PDF guide that you can download and view at your own time. So we could just zoom in there just to give you an overview of what we're going to cover today. We're going to talk about, just start from the top. What exactly do you mean by systems innovation and why is it relevant? We're going to look at some examples and some methods for doing systems innovation. So it's kind of a combination of ideas, methods, examples as we go through. It's relatively, well, it's very high level, but relatively short introduction as we just have 1 hour. And we're going to welcome your questions and comments. To a large extent, that's why we're here, because all of it's in the guide. If you just want to read that, great, you can go there. Mainly we join here so that we can share it with you, we can discuss it with you, we can kind of point you in the right direction as to where to go next. So we'll be doing that at the end, talking about what resources and so forth we have available for you to kind of continue your journey here. So you can see there the bottom 4 slides are just kind of breaking out the main areas of systems innovation that will touch upon systems thinking, mapping, transition design, and ecosystem building. So that's that. Maybe I'll grab the board. Anya, do you want to share the mirror link back in the chat in case people want to join? And we'll get started. So, share my screen. Okay. So just going to present kind of each section at the end. I'll just be 5 minutes talking or so, and then at the end we welcome your questions or comments in the chat, or you can unmute yourself. So here is mentioned is the guide. So you can click on that link and it'll take you to the website, and you'll find that. So just say a quick word about myself. As mentioned, I'm Joss. I set up the SI network. I started kind of researching and getting involved in the whole area of system thinking, complexity about 10 years ago. About 5 years ago, I came across complexity or systems innovation and systems change. I've been researching and building a lot of content and learning material around that and the community. So we built this set of guides about 5 years ago, four years ago, that are open and freely accessible on the site. And this content's kind of coming from that. We'll talk more about it as we get to the end. So here we are, right at the top. What is systems innovation? And there's many ways of presenting that and talking about it. And often people use the word in quite a vague way. I mean, systems and innovation, we've heard both those words, so we think we kind of know what it is. But I often find it's not until people actually dig into it that they kind of come back to me and say, oh, I thought I knew what it was. And now I've just spent, a couple of months researching, and actually I kind of know what it really is. And I was quite far away. So there is actually a kind of definition behind it as to what it is and how it works beyond just two kind of terms that we kind of throw around a lot. So as mentioned, there's different ways of approaching that. This is one of them, right? It's the idea that we're talking about innovation. When we say innovation, we mean a process, a creative process of generating new ideas and applying them to changing something in the world, changing established practices, bringing something new into the world that is of value. And in creating value, it's going to attract people to that new way of doing things and thus change established practices, whatever that is, the way we brush our teeth, the way we drive around, the way we communicate, or whatever it is. We have heard a lot about innovation. And it's saying here there's actually two kinds. Normally when we talk about innovation, we kind of default towards this reductionist approach to innovation. And it's really what drives a lot of the discourse around innovation. Normally we say innovation, people think technology, or maybe services at best. And that's innovation. Yes, it is the creation of new ideas, right? Those scientific reductionist ideas, we apply them towards developing new technologies, for example, or cars and computers and so forth. That's quite a reductionist approach to innovation. It's innovation in individual parts that we bring to market in products and services. We're saying there's another kind of innovation, which is actually innovation in systems. When we say systems, we mean a set of interrelated parts that are organized to perform an overall function. And we're saying doing innovation in complex systems is normally what we're talking about here. Requires something different from this reductionist approach. Creating more parts, more products or services is not really going to get us there. We actually need to be thinking differently. We need to be thinking at the kind of systems level if we're going to influence and change things on that level. And that new way of thinking we call systems thinking. It helps us understand systems and complexity. And from that, we can start to innovate in a new way, which is more about reorganizing that system and enabling it to fulfill a new function. So we could be talking about changes in the way that we fulfill mobility, or changes in the way that we fulfill education and so forth by reorganizing that education system. And we'll talk about examples in a minute. But this is generally what we're talking about. When we say systems innovation, it's moving up from individual products and services to systems. Hopefully that makes sense to everyone. it's really the essence of it. And just to say a few more words, I mean, this graphic kind of captures it. It's change, it's no longer trying to change parts, which is a lot of what we do. When we have complex problems, we have to break them down into individual problems and then try to find individual solutions to them. But this is saying, no, actually, sometimes the problems are systemic. If they're wicked problems, they're the way the system's organized, the way we're thinking about that system, and the way it's organized to fulfill its function. And we need to act on that level and change it on that level. And that's systems change, systems innovation. And as mentioned, it requires this really two things, new ways of thinking. So same old thinking will give us the same old results. And those results typically aren't helping us. We aren't very good at addressing wicked challenges. If you look at any of them, you know, terrorism, climate change, cybersecurity, migration, homelessness, none of these things are really getting any better. And that's a lot to do with the fact that we're taking the wrong way of thinking about it and the wrong approach to addressing those challenges. We need to understand them as complex and start thinking in a more holistic way, the systems thinking, but then start organizing in new ways, new collaborative networks for us to actually work together around the challenge instead of dividing it up and separating it out. So that's what we mean by systems innovation, new ways of thinking, new ways of organizing, so that we can collaborate and work around what we call wicked systemic challenges in new ways and build a capacity for addressing them in a more effective way.
Yes, so we don't have questions yet, so I think we can move on.
Anybody want to unmute themselves and ask a question? We're all happy so far.
Yeah, makes sense. I think we'll have more space for questions as it goes on.
Okay, good. So that's the top kind of level. Maybe we'll look at some examples here. And I've picked out 3 different examples for you, each illustrating different kind of aspects. So there's this one here. Many cities are thinking about decarbonization, and that's a big challenge for them. They're setting ambitious goals for 2030 or 2035 to decarbonize, particularly their transport system. And there's many different ways of going about that. It's a complex challenge, but you can simply approach it by trying to change all the cars, right? If they're the ones creating the problem, that would be kind of a reductionist approach, because we focus on the individual parts and we fix them. But there's another way of thinking about this problem, a more holistic way, where we actually think outside the box, because that's kind of inside the box in a certain way. We're taking what already exists, as we often do with analytical thinking, and we're thinking about how to improve it or make it a bit better. And that's that, and it can work for simpler challenges. But this one here, we could actually think of it outside the box, and we could start questioning what's the function of this system, and could it fulfill its function in a radically different way? So the function might be mobility, or even if we go a step further, it's access, right? People want access to things. They don't necessarily want cars or even mobility. They want to be able to access what they want, and they're getting cars and they use mobility to try and access things. So if we could actually think about the system of connectivity that's around them and their access to the things they need and change that, maybe we wouldn't fix the individual problems of the cars. We might actually dissolve the whole problem, because if they had access right beside them to their school and to their park and to their work, they wouldn't necessarily need a car. And that's thinking about the system they form part of. So looking at the city and saying, we don't want to just change all these cars and try to fix them. How can we change the city? And that's an idea of the 15-minute city. Maybe you've heard of it. a number of cities, a number of people and cities are talking about this and trying to put it into practice, where you could access, the city was organized in such a way so that you can access most of what you need within 15 minutes. You could walk or cycle to things. And that changes kind of the paradigm around mobility and so forth. And of course, it kind of dissolves the challenge instead of solving it, instead of fixing it, should we say. So I like that example because it kind of illustrates how this is innovation in context. It's innovation in the context we find ourselves in rather than the individual problem itself. And we have to look more broadly beyond the individual problem of the car and try and look at the overall system and change that. Does that example help illustrate the idea of what we're talking about here? On a scale of 1 to 10, how do you feel this helps you kind of grasp the concept at this very high level? How do you're grasping it at this time? You could put that in the chat. Great, Gabri, you're at a 9. Okay, great. Wow, 9 out of 10. Super stuff. We've already made some progress. I think we started at what was it, 1 or 2, and now we're up to 9 already. That's good work just for 20 minutes. Okay, so 1 or 2 more people joining. Let's stay going and take another example. So here is violent crime in Glasgow City. So Glasgow has historically been one of the most violent cities in Europe for over a century, all throughout the 20th century, right up until very recently, the 2000s. And traditionally, police took a very reductionist and traditional approach to that, as we often do. It's about looking at the individual people and seeing them as bad people and locking them up so as to fix and remove the problem. We know generally that doesn't work. The problem stays recreating itself because we're not actually addressing, the system, right? What's going on underneath and all around these young people are getting involved in gangs and violent crime in Glasgow City. So in 2005, police officer McCluskey set up the Violent Reduction Units and took a very different paradigm, a very different way of looking at this challenge, actually, before even starting. And seeing violence not as a problem of the individual agents, people in the system, but more like a disease or a pandemic that spreads between people, more like a culture. And we're kind of familiar with this idea from the pandemic of things spreading amongst us, damaging, dangerous things spreading amongst us. So it's easier for us to get our heads around it, but they changed that whole paradigm of this violence in Glasgow was a public health kind of challenge, and that it was actually a kind of a culture that was spreading amongst young men, particularly of violence and being involved in gangs and so forth. So after kind of reframing it in that way, it made sense to take a very different approach from just focusing on law enforcement and incarceration and so forth. Again, they started to look outside the system. And when you look outside the system, you start to say, well, these young people, they're part of, broader systems, right? Housing, health, education, employment, family support, local community groups, businesses, so on and so forth. Architecture, landscaping, transport, actually important too. These are all systems that these young people form part of. And how is it that they're ending up in this situation? You're saying there's something wrong with all these systems in some way. They find themselves as part of a context that is really not helping them succeed and thrive in the world. And they're getting involved in violent crime, and that's spreading as a culture amongst them. So how can we actually start to change that context? So they set up this violence reduction unit as a platform for bringing these different actors across the system, people in public health, public officials, family support, social welfare, so on and so forth, all together to start to work together collaboratively around this challenge to prevent young men from being attracted to a culture of violence, at the same time looking to give them attractive alternatives. So again, that was kind of shifting the paradigm. If you see what we're talking about, the initial reductionist approach was focusing on the young men, and that this was a problem with them and stay locking them up. Didn't actually address the systemic factors creating this. And they changed paradigm to actually start thinking about the system. A new approach looked at the context of trying to change that context to prevent the issue from arising in the first place. Hopefully, again, you see this idea of dissolving problems rather than solving them. So we move away from a problem solution framing, and we move to a framing about context and emergence, and saying these problems are emerging out of dysfunctional system, a dysfunctional context, and we need to change that context if we're going to get the emergence of new outcomes. So how does that make sense to everyone? Does this one help you kind of build up your understanding of what we're talking about here? It's again this idea of emergence, right? That when we talk about wicked problems, we're talking about systemic ones. They're part of the way the system is organized, right? People don't just wake up one day and say, "Oh, I want to cause violent crime." That's actually emerges out of a long history of them forming part of different systems that really aren't working for them, and their exposure to other people who have been part of that system and have perpetuated that violence and so forth. So it's this idea of kind of getting to, going down the iceberg, getting to the underlying structural and mental models that are out of which these issues are arising and trying to address those. Did this approach help them? It did radically. So now Glasgow, I can show you the data. Actually, they even quantified it. It saved Glasgow and Scotland billions of euros, actually. And the results were quite very substantial. They're now way down the list in terms of violent crime, and they've become a city of European cultural capital. And actually, London and other parts of the UK have adopted this violence reduction unit. So if you just search for that, you would find data about it. Okay, let's dig on one more example just to try and solidify this. People always ask me for examples, so I'm just going to give you lots so that no one asks for one this time. So here's another one, Mexico City. It has a problem with water scarcity, and that's been in the news more recently, but this has been a problem for some time. And actually, Mexico City gets a lot of rain, actually. It just all falls at the one time, and that creates problems with flooding and difficult to capture it. So they have had a very traditional kind of linear industrial age water system that shipped the water in from outside or piped the water in from outside the city into the city and kind of distributed it there. It didn't really reach everyone. It didn't reach the poor communities. And when there was this earthquake, the pipes got damaged and there was flooding. 4 million people were cut off from clean water. And then after that, this organization, Oximilco, in this neighborhood, Oximilco, came in and they started using rain harvesting water systems so that citizens were actually equipped themselves with decentralized low-tech water systems, basins and plumbing, for them to set up their own rain harvesting water capturing systems. And then they were actually able to trade that locally, peer-to-peer. And the results were the building of new connections, a new economy for water, and a new system that was more resilient, replacing the scarcity and dependency with abundance of water. So that's another quick example. We moved from a linear industrial age system to a different model in some parts of the city that was more decentralized and actually empowered the agents, the people, to create their own solutions in a more decentralized fashion, and built a new economy, new connections within communities to do that. So we call that a systems innovation again, because it's actually changed the underlying system that was provided. It didn't just, ship in more water, didn't just kind of fix the pipes. It actually changed the the structure of that system and the way that the people were accessing water.
There was a question from Gabri, but I think it was for Glasgow City violent crime, if this approach lowered crime rates. Um,
Yeah, I kind of spoke to that a bit already. Any other questions? Do you want to? Oh, you could unmute yourself, Giselle. But yeah, Anya, do you want to read that?
okay. So I don't know. This. Um, when we go to a deep discovery about the origins of a complex problem, automatically we adopt a system thinking approach, right? Um, I mean, to understand the causes and to design a solution, ways to solution, we need to have a holistic or systemic view, consider context, etc. Um,
Yeah, I think you're always considering the underlying factors out of which the challenge emerges, rather than, we normally think of cause and effect way of looking at the world. When we have a problem, we immediately search for an effect that's creating that, maybe one or two or three, and then we try to fix those. And that's a linear way of thinking. Whereas when we think differently, when we say actually this problem, this challenge emerges out of a complex system and the way that's organized, and we need to understand that, and we need to try and find methods and approaches that are working to change the structure of that system and the way it's functioning, then you're taking a systems approach. So you got to kind of look at that context, look at that bigger system. Yeah.
In these examples, did authorities explicitly draw upon systems thinking, literature, thinkers, or are these examples of accidental system solutions? Good
Yeah,
question.
good question. I mean, this one here, well, the answer is no, they didn't. But you don't have to call something systems thinking for it to be systems thinking. But ideally, a systems innovation would come from a certain amount of awareness to the system and involve systems thinking, even if you don't call it that. So you can see these do come, right? What this lady did in Glasgow obviously came from a broader level of awareness. Could we please mute ourselves? It came from a broader level of awareness that we would call systems thinking, whether we put a name tag on it or not. So it's definitely expressive of it.
So we just have 20 to 25 minutes left. Shall we hopefully run through everything?
Yep. I think we're doing okay for time. So yeah, feel free to stay posting questions and comments in the chat there. I'm not going to go through everything today because we have a short period and you can read it in the guide. So that was what is the systems innovation thing, and then some examples to illustrate the concepts, in terms of looking at system structure and how challenges emerge out of that. Maybe should we just quickly take this one, Anya?
Mhm. So I'll read the one from Angela. Sometimes in a complex environment, maybe it is challenging to attribute the causes of problems we are trying to solve. How do we deal with these unknowns? Good question.
Yeah, another good question. In some ways, you try to shift away from that direct attribution, and you start to try and step back and look at the broader system, get people to work together around that broader system. So in some ways, you try to move away from just trying to find that direct cause or that direct attribution, which is challenging for a lot of people in organizations, particularly, if they want to have attribution. We're the ones who did this. non-for-profits and foundations struggle with this because it requires them to kind of overcome their ego in terms of collaborating and working together around the challenge, and they themselves may not actually get direct attribution for it because it's difficult to trace, right? But they work together and they can say they all kind of did it. Okay. Oh, there's another. Yeah. Okay.
Maybe
So
we tap into those topics soon with the next coming slides around approaches to look into unknowns collaboratively.
great. Okay, so now we're going to go into the methods and the tools we can use for doing this. We do need to grasp the concepts, but ultimately this is a practical subject. We need to go out and do it in the world, and some framing, some structure, some kind of models and methods will definitely, in process, will definitely help us in that, although they're not a replacement for it, right? We still actually have to go and do it. It's just that some of these, some methods will help us. And there are quite a few out there, right? Different ways of doing this. This is what we've developed at SI, just as a simple model for saying, what are the general capacities and capabilities we need to bring into play here, the general things we need to think about, what are the general questions we'll have when we go and do this work if we want to do it effectively. So on the top left, we're talking about framing, which is really the systems thinking thing. It's how can we actually create new insight, right? We talked about innovation as the creation and application of new ideas. If there's no new ideas here, if there's no systems thinking, if we're not reframing the challenge in some way, then there's no innovation, like that example in Glasgow City. If we just go on thinking about it as a problem with young people and we need to lock them up, we just need to do that better with some technology, then that's not systems innovation. We actually, like that lady did, and like in the other examples there, they reframed the challenge. They looked at decarbonization of cities, of mobility, as a system in a systemic way. And the same in Glasgow. They looked at it in a contextual way. So that's what I mean by framing. We take a challenge, and normally the actors are thinking about that in a reductionist way. And we start to, you start to think about that differently. Sorry, did you want to jump in there, Anya? What to say?
Yeah, so just this whole process, we did not develop this, but a lot of people are using these approaches, and we are using it in very different ways depending on the context. And it's always a process. So the way we frame things, and that relates to the unknown topic, once we discover the unknowns, we actually reframe the challenge, and that's exactly what we are actually doing when we are looking into systems. We tap into many unknowns. That's
Yeah,
just
and we build upon many ideas and methods that are already out there, I think is what you're saying also. We didn't invent this from nowhere. We're just saying there's a general set of challenges here and a general set of kind of tools that are generally out there already, and we need to bring those in. We need to learn them and apply them. So the first ones are around, reframe the challenge in a systemic way. And systems thinking's been around for many decades, over almost a century and so forth, and many ideas, the iceberg model, the elephant parable, and so forth. Over here, we need to do a kind of map out the challenge, right? We need to actually understand the system, the different factors, the different actors involved, and we call that systems mapping, stakeholder analysis, and find the intervention points. We talk about leverage points and so forth. These are all core ideas, core methods when people talk about systems innovation, because we do need to understand the system, what's involved, and so forth. Down here on the bottom right, we're talking about transition and transition design. At some point, we need to think about the change from the old system to the new system. It's not linear, it's kind of complex how that plays out. There's processes of kind of growth and decay, and the incumbents and the new innovations. How do they work together? What are the new innovations? How do we help develop, nurture, and grow? What do we need to design? What's missing in the system? Those are kind of key questions there that you'll face. And finally, over here, we talk about ecosystem building, which is great. We have all these new innovations, but how do we actually put them together in synergistic ways, connect them, enable them to collaborate, work together, co-learn, co-create, over a long period of time, so they can actually start to develop and grow a new system and ultimately replace the incumbent one, which takes time. And that's why it's an ongoing process. You need a kind of infrastructure for collaboration. And we talk about ecosystem building in that section, a lot of ideas and tools there also. So this makes sense to people. We're not saying it's the only way. We're not even saying it's the right way. We're just saying it's one way of bringing different ideas and methods together and help us go about doing this. It's obviously not linear, 1, 2, 3. It's iterative, and you are maybe jumping even between different phases and different sections of it. So hopefully it helps you kind of think about some of the stuff that's going on here. Maybe I'll stay going through it so that you can understand better what we mean by those different areas. We'll break the rest down like that. It's just to say that, you know, applying this methods and tools, they have different time horizons. So you can have really short things like, you know, 2-hour workshop, right? You can have something longer that's maybe a kind of project of some kind. You can have a lab that's ongoing, exploring the challenge. You can have an ecosystem, as I said, that's maybe lasting a decade or many decades for a network of actors to work together. So it plays out at different time horizons. It plays out across different levels, depending on the scale of the challenge you're trying to address and so forth. But you can use the same kind of methodologies and tools and process at those different time and scale horizons. Yeah, we have a canvas just to help people think about that initially and ideate on why do we need this aspect of it? Why do we need another, and so forth. Any questions on that before I stay going? The next section is already just kind of jumping into those different dimensions to kind of explain them a little bit more and why we need them. Okay, great. So the first one was around systems thinking. And needing to bring in new perspective into the challenge that we face. Normally doesn't necessarily come naturally to us, kind of us modern people, once we've gone through our education systems that are quite reductionist and organizations and so forth. So often you need to bring in new thinking, bring in systems thinking. And that's really going to help us kind of look. I talked about it before a few times, kind of outside the box, and this graphic helps to illustrate that. It's a more holistic way where we're going to frame the challenge in a broader context. So we saw in a few of those examples, two different dimensions, two ways of doing, well, we saw it at the beginning, two ways of doing innovation, right? We talked about an analytical reductionist approach. And that's a certain type of thinking that narrows us down our vision. And you take a bicycle and it takes it apart and tries to understand all the parts and tries to optimize and improve the system itself. And that served us very well. It's very good for improving the efficiency. It's very good for understanding how things work and improving the internal workings of systems. And we do a lot of that. But there's another way of thinking. It's a holistic, synthetic way of reasoning where we look upwards instead of focusing on the bicycle. We put the bicycle out there in the world into its context, the person cycling in a transport system, in a city, in an environment. And we start asking questions or looking at things from that perspective. And then we can ask very different questions, and we can, from that, do a very different kind of innovation. In that broader context, we start asking questions about how does it function in this environment? Is it adapted to its environment? What is it connected and related to? And how does it function in relation to those other things, such as the person? Is it the right size for this person? Is there a place to park this bike when I finish cycling? So on and so forth. Are there cycle lanes? Is this a rainy city and there's going to be a lot of challenge cycling? So that gives you a whole pile of different questions, and it gives you a whole new way of innovating. It starts bringing up the question of why. Why are we doing this? And potentially changing not the internal workings of the system, but can actually totally rewrite the way you try to achieve your function. May not even need a bike. Going back to that example of mobility, you might figure out a way that actually you get access to the things you want without even needing a bicycle. And then you kind of transform that system, the mobility system. So that's why we need systems thinking, to be looking upwards and outwards, because that's where we get transformative kinds of innovation. And yeah, some graphics here you can take a look through that really help us differentiate out what we mean by reductionist and holistic thinking. You know, reductionism is more top-down, separates out, it focuses on more centralized way of doing most important parts, it narrows our vision down to them. Holistic thinking is more about emergence of organization, thinks about connections, synergies, decentralized coordination. It's a more processed way of looking at the world. So I'm not going to, yeah, I'll be giving you too much information today if I went into all of this. Hopefully some of these graphics kind of help you capture this mentally in terms of what we're talking about here, shifting away from a more egocentric view of the world to a more ecosystem way of looking at it as part of a network of complex adaptive systems of interacting factors and elements and thinking about it in that broader context. So that's a little bit system thinking, and you'll find canvases and tools and so forth on the website to help you with that. Yeah, won't go too much into it now. It's a huge area. Everybody happy so far in terms of, are you following along on a scale of 1 to 10? Is this all making sense to you? Or are you struggling a bit to kind of get your head around it, right? 8 from 4, great. 8, Jamie? Anybody else, what do you think? Scale 1 to 10? Is this making sense to you? 6 to 7? Evelyn, do you want to share anything about, you know, how this is making sense or failing to make sense? You could unmute yourself if you want.
So it makes sense, but bringing up other questions.
Yeah, there's a lot to think about here, isn't there? These are big ideas, and it's a bit of a paradigm shift if you're new to this, right? Daria, 8 to 9. Just need more time to go through the guide. Yes, obviously takes time to process this. Is that a question from Kirsten?
Mm-hmm. So, do you offer a course on how to navigate the SI platform and tools and provide more history, purpose behind the platform and group?
So Anya, you have an answer to that, don't you?
Well,
We
this
have an
is
event coming up, don't we? An info session.
yes. So we do have we don't have an official course, but we have events that come up that are about how to navigate and explore the SI platform. So you can find events that might be of
Do
use
you,
to you.
yeah,
In
we have the info session coming up next month. Do you want to grab a link to that and share it? Introduction to the SI network.
Mhm.
Okay, I'll stay going. You can share that with Kirsten. Alrighty, so as you note, it's a bit of a crash course here. Lots of big ideas. Takes time to process all this if you're new to it, but hopefully you're getting the outlines. And you know, the idea is that you start to get a sense of what this is about, and also whether it's relevant for you. Right? Maybe when you showed up, some people were 0 when they showed up, means you didn't know anything about it, and you're still trying to figure out what is this and is it relevant for you. So I think that's just as important. To figure out if it could kind of help with what you're working on. So let's dig out. We talked about systems thinking as the first aspect here. That was the framing section there, framing the challenge. We're going to talk about mapping now very quickly because we just have 10 minutes left actually. So mapping is about understanding the system, right? What are the elements and interrelationships? You can see here that are constituting this system. So this is maybe a very stylized example of a food system, and we have elements in it and then interrelationships between them through which one thing is relating to another, is interdependent or affecting another. So, you know, we've got supermarkets and end users, right? There's a relationship there. we obviously have farmers and supermarkets or distributors, and there's a relationship there. Regulation is affecting the farmers, and the machinery is feeding into the food processing and so forth. So this is to really dig into how does the system work? What are the factors? What are the actors there? And then we can start to think about where are the places we want to intervene, these intervention points or leverage points. Which one of those intervention points will give us high leverage? If we want to change this food system, do we need to go and talk to the people doing the marketing of food? Do we need to talk to the people who are doing policy and regulation? Do we need to go and talk to the supermarkets or the farmers? Or do we need to talk to a combination of them? And how much resources do we have? Who can we effectively talk to? And where's the really high leverage? So this is getting strategic about how we're going to change this system. Going back to the example of violent crime in Glasgow, we know McCluskey talked to many different actors across that system. Who are the ones we need to bring together? Is it particularly the schools we need to talk to, or is it particularly the parents we need to talk to? Is it something about housing or social welfare, or what is it we need to intervene here? Where and where can we, and where's very high leverage? Because we're always limited in our resources, and the system's always, well, typically very complex, right? So we need to have high leverage intervention. So this section is all about understanding the system and then trying to find those best intervention points. And systems innovation always requires us to understand the system so that we can work with it rather than against it. So the third section then, as mentioned, is about transitions. Now that we understand the system, how are we going to develop and grow the new innovations and help transition from the incumbent way of doing things, which is, we're saying, not very functional, and we're trying to move to a new system. So what are the new innovations that we need to identify, nurture, develop, grow, sometimes design or incubate or launch them? There might be projects, there might be startups, there might be products or services or whatever it is. Those are the new innovations we need to introduce into the system. And that we're starting to think about a transition process. We have this existing system we know about, but we know new innovations are always there when there's a transition process. We need to find them and work with them to develop and grow them. And if they don't exist, we need to build them ourselves or design them ourselves. So we call this systems gardening and systems design and things like this to actually start to develop the new innovations in the system. We have many models there to think about transition design. This one's called the two loops model. We also have three horizons, multi-level perspective, and so forth. Actually, tomorrow we have a learning session on multi-level perspective, which is one way of thinking about the transition process. So I'm just going to stay going now for the sake of time. The final section, we talk about ecosystem building. And we've identified these new innovations. We've started to maybe nurture and grow them and resource them, and maybe even design some and launch some new initiatives in the system. But that won't necessarily change the system, because these initiatives need to be working together collaboratively or synergistically around the challenge. Otherwise, you're going to get a set of individual parts, and that's not how you change systems. So to do that over a long period of time, help actors, or a period of time, help actors work together collaboratively around this challenge, you need to kind of use this idea of an ecosystem and ecosystem building. And that means looking at these new innovations as a system, right, in some sense, and saying, right, we've identified these actors, but how are we going to, what activities are we going to do to help them work together, to co-learn around the challenge? Because they've got to learn together to make sense of it. They have to co-create around the challenge also, because they've actually got to do something eventually to change the system in a coordinated way. And there's a few things needed there to support that ecosystem, right? You need some kind of a platform, some kind of an underlying organization that's going to support this, maybe some technology, right? Like for SI, we have a website that supports our ecosystem, our community. You need these activities that they're going to do. It might be conferences to connect them. It might be meetups. It might be hackathons or labs or co-creations or projects or whatever it is. We need maybe some identity for this ecosystem to help people let people know about it and attract people to it. We need a value model that is, how is this going to create value so the actors want to be part of it? An understanding of that. Assessment, how do we assess whether this is working or not, whether we're going in the right direction? How do we do investment into this ecosystem and so forth? So those are all considerations around ecosystem building. And also about scaling, how are we going to scale this in a more kind of organic and decentralized way, get network effects, get kind of end users engaged in this, maybe trying to start a movement here in some way. So thinking about more kind of networked ways of working and collaborating around the challenge, rather than more traditional linear approach to that. And we have quite a few templates around that help you think about what's the ecosystem I'm building, what's the purpose of that, who are the actors I'm bring together, what ways are they going to work together, you know, the activities, how can we assess for outcomes, how can we enable learning, so on and so forth. What are the challenges, the specific challenges in this system? We're going to bring them together around. So that's that. I tried to stay on time and go quickly towards the end there. Let's see if there are any last remarks before we wrap up.
Yeah, and if anyone has questions around how to join the SI network, I put the event link in the chat for our next session, and it's also on the Miro board. So I'm just going to send that as well.
Okay, Evelyn, great. That sounds like a 9 out of 10. Okay, hopefully we're all a number of steps up from where we were when we started in terms of our understanding. And as mentioned, hopefully you're making sense of how some of this fits together, what it's like, whether it's relevant for you. And we'll just kind of in a minute now kind of move on to how, you know, next steps, what you can get involved in on the website and so forth.
So we have a question in terms of SI itself, is it primarily a network, consultancy company, learning resource, a combination of all?
Yeah, good question. The only one we're not in that list is a consulting company. The rest we are. We're a bit like this, right? We're trying to grow a community. We're trying to grow an ecosystem. So we're doing the activities to support people on that journey, from initial awareness, like we're doing today, right? So we do these activities to them learning, to them connecting, to them co-creating. So we support people and do those different activities. So you can think of us as a platform that's developing a network of people who want to learn and co-create around this and doing the activities, the learning activities, connecting, and co-creation activities for that to happen. But if you join that info session in, I think it's 2 weeks away, we'll explain, yeah, fully what SI is about. Okay. Is there a question?
So there's one. If groups in the network have conflicting perspectives, what might be some strategies to work with them?
Okay, I assume you're talking about developing some ecosystem, some network, and how do you, okay, if they have different perspectives and opinions. Yeah, I think you should join our module around stakeholder analysis. Maybe that's quite a specific kind of question, but I guess ultimately you're trying to, you know, you're doing the mapping together so that there's a chance, or as best you can together, so that people can negotiate those differences of opinion, different perspectives and conflicts and so forth in the process. So this is a journey, and particularly the mapping is a journey with the different actors for them to have those conversations to try and start to reconcile their differences and their conflicts and so forth. In an ideal world, it works like that, yeah. That's why it requires kind of good facilitation also, right, to be able to navigate those differences of opinions and tensions and conflict. Okay, I think our time's come to close. So I'll just say a couple of words about resources on SI. So this is a very quick getting started guide. You'll find it at the beginning there. We then also produce about 2021 of these guides that kind of walk you through all the different areas of systems innovation. I talked about 4 different areas, right? There's the thinking, the mapping, the change in buildings. We have 5 guides under each of those. There's also a systems innovation guide to get you started there also. But these go a bit more in depth. They're freely accessible, Creative Commons. You're welcome to use them. They look a bit like that. So they're not heavy and boring. They're quite light, lots of visuals and graphics to help explain all the ideas. And you'll find that there, the SI guides. And that's a good way to kind of go deeper at your own pace as you wish. We also have video courses. This is definitely going deeper. Like each course is maybe, 10, 20 video lessons focusing on specific areas. Like ecosystem building I talked about, or systems leadership, systems change, things like futures and foresight, which is part of all of that methodology there, network theory and so forth. So you'll find those courses on the website. We also made these cards, which really bring those ideas up to quite a simplified, refined level where you can see graphics, and there's about 100 concept cards that help you learn each of those concepts. You could take 1 or 2 a day and work through them to start learning them like that and research them yourselves also. So that's a good way of learning. You'll find those on the website. And then when it comes to the tools, we have a whole set of corresponding tools structured again, things like thinking about the different levels to a challenge, like the iceberg model, different perspectives, like the elephant canvas. We've got mapping canvases, things about transitions. We saw the 2 loops there, some around ecosystem building and so forth. Okay, I'll give it back to you, Anya. Wrap up.
Yes, so this is what I mentioned before. We do have upcoming events as well on various topics. So this one is part of the Explore series, which I mentioned before. And if anyone is interested in learning how to engage with the SI network and also find different ways of being involved, then definitely join the next event. And this one's yeah, about getting started with the SI network as well. And yeah, you can find all of the events on the events page, which I sent the link in the chat before. So hopefully you can save that link and click on the link on the mirror board as well if you want to SI explore.